I'm seeing a lot of confusion online about how we can develop the skill of recognizing chord progressions by ear. So I wanted to start this video by talking a bit about the most important scientific findings related to our perception of chord progressions. This will be useful for you to properly understand the second part of this video, in which I'll show you in detail what are the two main ways in which we can recognize chord progressions by ear. I suggest you keep watching this video till the end because it will be very helpful to you. Let's talk a bit about what are the main scientific findings about our perception of chord progressions. The most important scientific studies are included in an essay called Cognitive Foundations of Musical Pitch by Carol Cramsell. This essay was published by the Oxford University Press, and basically the most important finding that it includes is that our perception of chord progressions is strongly context dependent. This means that the same chord, the exact same chord, sounds extremely different if we include it in two different keys. So for example, a simple C major chord will sound extremely different if we play it in a song that it's, for example, in C major, than if we play it in a song that is in F major. And I want you to listen to a quick example so you can better understand what I'm saying. So at first you'll listen to a set of chords that will establish the C major key. Then you'll listen to the C major chord. In this way, you'll be able to perceive the feeling that the C major chord assumes when it's being played in the C major key. Can you perceive the sensation of resolution, of completeness that the C major chord carries when it's played inside the C major key? Let's listen to it one more time. Now you'll hear a set of chords that will establish the F major key. Then you'll hear the C major chord again. So you will be able to perceive the feeling that the C major chord assumes in the F major key. Can you feel that this time the C major chord carries a sensation of tension, of incompleteness? And because of this sensation, it wants to resolve on the F major chord, like that. So it's very different from the C major chord as we heard it in the previous example. Another important study was done by Don Gibson Jr. in 1986 and is called The Oral Perception of Non-Traditional Chords in Selected Theoretical Relationships. This study shows that the intervals that are included in a chord aren't related to our perception of the chord. So, two chords that are formed by the same intervals can sound extremely different from one another. Let's make a real quick example so you can better understand what I'm saying. Let's compare two really simple chords, the C major triad and the C minor triad. This is the C major triad and this is the C minor triad. You can feel that they sound very different from one another. Major, minor. The interesting thing is that if we take a closer look at these two triads, we discover that these two triads are formed by the same intervals. For example, let's take a closer look at the C major triad. You can see that there is a major third interval, a minor third interval, and a fifth interval. Okay? Let's take a closer look at the C minor triad now. Again, we have a major third, a minor third, and the fifth. So the only difference between the C major triad and the C minor triad is that the major third interval and the minor third interval are swapped. Even though this is a very small difference from an interval point of view, we can feel how, on a sound level, these two triads are extremely different. So these findings that I've just told you really shows us that intervals are not the right way, are not the right approach to understand chord progressions by ear. Indeed, intervals ear training, in whatever form it can be applied, melodic intervals, harmonic intervals, whatever, it's totally inadequate for developing these skills, the skill of recognizing chord progressions by ear. And it's inadequate for many other things in ear training, but that's another video. So let's go on and let me show you the two main ways in which we can understand chord progressions by ear. And these are the real ways used in real life by musicians who are able to understand chord progressions by ear in real time. Just as they listen to the progressions, they can understand what chords are being played. And I call these two ways as the zoom in method and zoom out method. The zoom in method occurs when we listen to a chord and we try to recognize it by identifying each individual note included in it at first. Then, by relying on our music theory knowledge, we can understand what chord is it. For example, if we listen to a chord and we hear that there are three notes included in it, there is C, E, and G, we immediately know by having a little theory knowledge that we are listening to a C major chord. And that's basically how the zoom in method works. I will dive deep into the zoom in method in just a moment, but let me explain the zoom out method now. The zoom out method is really the most convenient, the fastest, the most efficient method for understanding chord progressions by ear. And it works like this. Basically, you listen to the progressions from a higher point of view without looking into each individual note, and you listen to each chord as a global unit. You listen to the feeling that each global unit, each chord gives you. So, for example, if you hear a progression that includes the first, the fourth, and the fifth chord of the key, the first chord will be the chord that gives you the sensation of resolution, and the fifth will have a sensation of tension, of incompleteness. Basically, there are 7 chords included in the key. Each one of these 7 chords assumes its own specific feeling. It can be a feeling of tension, a feeling of resolution, or something in between. By training your mind to distinguish these 7 different sensations, these 7 different feelings, you can develop the ability to recognize chord progressions by ear really fast, as they are being played in real time, without even thinking of them. Although these two methods can seem self-explanatory, there are many important things to know about them in order to apply them effectively. So let me explain to you what these important things are and really pay attention to them, because if you don't, neither of these methods will work for you. Let's take a deeper look at the zoom in method. The zoom in method can be applied using 3 different strategies. The slowest strategy, but easiest one, is the trial and error strategy. The medium level strategy is called the sing and match strategy. The fastest but more difficult and more demanding strategy is called the sing and identify strategy. The trial and error strategy occurs when someone tries to identify each individual note included in a chord by helping himself with an instrument, by playing random notes on his instrument till he finds the notes that matches the ones included in the chord. So this is a very slow and painful process that's usually adopted by beginners musicians. But there are much more convenient way to apply the zoom in method. So let's see the next strategy. This is what I call the sing and match strategy, and it works like this. Basically, it's very similar to the trial and error strategy. The main difference is that you don't play random notes on your instrument till you find the right one, but you listen closely to the chord and you sing the notes that are included in it. Then, by helping yourself with an instrument, you find the notes that you're singing. And that's much more convenient and faster than the previous strategy for sure, but that's not the most convenient strategy for applying the zoom in method. Indeed, it requires the help of an instrument. So the most convenient strategy for applying the zoom in method is what I call the sing and identify strategy. This strategy doesn't require that you help yourself with an instrument. So you can identify chords using this strategy only with your mind, only with your ears, okay? The sing and identify strategy requires that you listen to a chord and you try to identify each individual note included in the chord, at first by singing the notes, then by finding the position of the notes inside the key, inside the tonality, inside the major scale, if you want. Then, by knowing the notes, you can easily understand what chord is it. For example, by listening to a chord, you can hear if the notes included in it are, for example, the first degree, the third degree, and the fifth degree of the scale. So, in that case, you know that it would be the first degree chord, the tonic chord. In order to be able to understand the position of the notes inside the key very quickly, it's important to internalize what I call the keys colors. And I have another video that explains everything about keys colors. You can find a link in the description below or somewhere up here. I suggest you watch it because it can be very helpful. So we've just taken an in-depth look about how the zoom in method works. As I was saying before, this isn't the most convenient and fastest approach in understanding chord progressions. The fastest and most convenient approach is the zoom out method. The zoom out method requires that you consider each chord as a global unit and you listen to the global feeling of each chord, and without going deep into listening for each individual note. There are 4 basic skills that are required in order to apply the zoom out method effectively. The first skill required is the ability to identify the tonic note of a given piece of music. That's because the tonic note acts as our North Star. By knowing the tonic note, we have a point of reference that allows us to properly judge the feeling of the other chords. If we misinterpret the tonic note, we end up having a distorted perception of the chords. So we won't be able to recognize their feeling properly, and we won't be able to apply the zoom out method. The second skill required in order to apply the zoom out method is having a basic internalization of the keys colors. That's important because the keys colors and the color of the chords, the sensation that each chord carries, are very similar. For example, the keys color of the first degree note, which is the sensation that the first degree note carries, is very similar to the feeling, the sensation that the first degree chord carries. The sensation of the second degree note is very similar to the sensation of the second degree chord, and so on. So by internalizing the keys colors, you also start to internalize the colors of the chords. And this means that having an internalization of the keys colors helps you in identifying the chords using the zoom out method in a faster and more efficient way. The third important skill is distinguishing major chords from minor chords. That's useful because by knowing a little about music theory, you know that, for example, in the major key, there are only 3 major chords and 3 minor chords, and there is 1 diminished chord. You know that the 3 major chords included in the major key are the 1st, 4th, and 5th degree chord. the three minor chords included in the major key are the second, third, and sixth degree chord. The seventh chord is the diminished one. If you're listening to a song and you hear a major chord, you would never think of it as the sixth degree of a major key, because you know that the sixth degree of a major key is a minor chord. And you know that it might be only a first degree chord, a fourth degree chord, or a fifth degree chord. So just by distinguishing if a chord is major or minor, you have half the options to choose from. The fourth skill required is the ability to extract the root note from the global color, the global sound of the chord. Let me clarify that this skill won't require that you listen to each individual notes inside the chord. You can extract the root note just by hearing the global sound of the chord. Basically, the root note is the most important note of the chord, so it's the one that is more emphasized. You can recognize the root note of a chord in a similar way in which you recognize the tonic note of a song. You'll listen to the global sound of the chord and you extract the note that has more weight. This is useful mainly for two reasons. At first, because it helps you in perceiving the global feeling of the chord properly. Then it allows you also to sing the melodic movement of the chord progression. And by singing the melodic movement of the root note of the progression, you can find their place inside the scale, inside the tonality more quickly. I think you can understand how the zoom out method can be the most efficient and fastest way to recognize chord progressions in a song. It shines especially for those musical genres in which chords appear as distinct blocks, and they are clearly separated from one another. Most musical genres have this characteristic, so the zoom out method can be easily applied to pop, rock, folk, and even some jazz songs. The only musical genres in which can be tricky to apply the zoom out method alone is classical music. This is because often chords aren't clearly separated from one another, and they don't appear as distinct blocks. So in this case, the best option to adopt is a mixture of the zoom in and the zoom out method. Generally speaking, I suggest you apply the mixed method whenever the chords of a song aren't clearly separated from one another. In doing that, I suggest you start by applying the zoom out method at first, and you focus on identifying the most obvious chords that are included in the progression. So, for example, they can be the tonic chord at the end of the progression or at the beginning of the progression, the dominant chord being played before the tonic chord, and things like that. After you have applied the zoom out method, you apply the zoom in method and you refine your perception of the progression. For example, you go and listen to each individual note in the bass line, so you understand if there are inversions or not. Or you can identify some chords that you're not sure of by understanding the individual notes that are included in them. There is a last question that some of you may have. What if a chord progression contains chords that doesn't belong to the main key of the song? My answer is simply to use the same methods I've explained till now. Let me premise that when a progression includes non-diatonic chords, that means chords that doesn't belong to the main key of the song, in almost every case, they comes from a somewhat familiar harmonic substitution or modulation. They can be, for example, secondary dominant, trident substitution, or borrowed chord from the parallel modes, or 2-5-1, for example, in jazz, and things like that. So they all have their specific sound, their specific feeling, and you can train your mind to recognize their sound, their feeling when listening to real songs. But also non-diatonic chords that doesn't belong to these familiar types, to these familiar harmonic modulations, substitutions, etc., have their own specific feeling. So every non-diatonic chord has its own specific feeling. So you can train your mind to internalize it so you can recognize it later. That's all for this video. I hope it will be helpful to you. Don't forget to leave your opinion or ask some questions in the comment section below. If you want more content like this, subscribe, leave a like, and share this video. Thank you. Bye.